Oh, all right. It's great to see you all. And we are ready to rock. Just put in the back of, I'll probably remove it shortly, but I put in the back so you can see what a Tanya used to look like. That's actually the third section of the Tanya, which, based on how fast we're going, we might get there in a couple of years. But it's really exciting to finish this section of the Tanya. And this section of the Tanya, one can look at it as a throwaway comment. Again, we're finishing this section of Tanya, and what I'm going to say is the little. Okay, we're in chapter 25, which, as I've mentioned the last couple of weeks, chapter 1 through 25 is one giant section, and you can look at it as what the Alter Rebbe is going to say today is a throwaway comment, or you can look at it as pointing out that what we're going to discuss is actually so foundational to Jewish people in general and to Hasidic philosophy especially. So I want to start with just reminding you quickly how we got here, because I'm going to do a full recap at the end so we can move on next week. But we are in the middle of the section of Tanya, which is basically telling you, if you want to be able to serve God, the easiest way to serve God is to remember that the easiest way to serve God is to remember. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of these blurry backgrounds. The easiest way to serve God is to remember that you would be willing to sacrifice yourself for God, and therefore, once you understand that every mitzvah connects you with God and every sin disconnects you from God, so you should harness that feeling and that inner latent love, what we call the Pinta Yid, the inner neshama, the inner Jew, then you would be able to withstand all the pressures of what you face in your day-to-day life. Chabad philosophy, as I always say, is both a philosophy and a movement. And we have seen this idea in the Chabad Hasidic philosophy of the idea of Mesirat Nefesh, the idea of giving up our lives, as an important theme. And unfortunately, in Chabad history, we have had to do it practically throughout the years. So just to go with a famous story, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father-in-law, he was the Rebbe basically when the communists took over. Okay, his father was the Rebbe before him, and his father passed away shortly after the communists took over. The communists, as we know, in Russia, did not like religion, and to the point where eventually they put Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the sixth Chabad Rebbe, in jail. They wanted to kill him. They did it because of American pressure. But be that as it may, he one time had a meeting of 10 of his great Chassidim, and where he gathered them and he said, we will serve God until the point of Mesirat Nefesh, until the point where we will give up our lives. And they all agreed. They made this pact and was able to maintain a presence in the USSR throughout the period of communism. And in the beginning of it was very difficult. Till Stalin died, during Stalin's reign, that was the worst period of time in the USSR. And during that time, it was really, really bad, to the point where sometimes he would send a teacher to a town, and that teacher would be killed or taken away. And then he would put another teacher, and that teacher would be taken away. And but we wouldn't give up. We wouldn't give up. And there was no seemingly way out of it. And so either you fight it or you give in. But a different story. We know that Chabad has, in Russia, like I said, in the USSR, gave up their lives to continue Judaism. But it's in some ways easier to sacrifice for Judaism. Not always, but in some ways it's easier to sacrifice for Judaism than it is to live as a Jew. So here's the story I want to say. In 1897, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, he saw what was happening in Russia, and he had a vision, Ruach HaKodesh, divine spirit, that there would come a very difficult day for Jews in Russia. Now, it's funny to imagine it, right? The Jews were living under the Tsar, which was no picnic. But he foresaw that there would be a day that being a Jew in Soviet Russia, in Russia, would be even worse. And so one day he had a gathering of the simple people of the town of Lubavitch, not the deep thinkers, and he told them a Hasidic discourse. And then this Hasidic discourse was called Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba B'Turnya. God does not come with too many demands. And the Rebbe Rashab gave this entire talk about how he foresees there will come a time soon that we will need Mesirat Nefesh. Mesirat Nefesh means people who are willing to give up their life for their Judaism for God. He says, I foresee that there will be a time when we will need Mesirat Nefesh. And he said something very interesting. He gave an example. He says, when there's a very hot body of water, you can also say when there's a cold body of water, either way. When there's something that you need to get into, you don't want to go into, we always find what goes in first are the feet, right? You dip a toe in it, and you slowly get into it. You slowly get into the hot water, the cold water, if anybody's had that experience, right? Of course, some people do a cannonball, but I don't think they do a cannonball in hot water. That's why it's a better example in hot water. You know, you first stick a foot, then you walk a little farther down, I actually remember on occasion, because as Chabadniks, we go to mikveh every day. And I remember when I was younger, I used to go to some of these mikvahs, and sometimes the mikveh was broken, but not in the way you'd think. The heater was broken. There was no gauge on it. And so it was really, really hot. Obviously, it wasn't scalding. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone into it. But it was really hot. And you go in a little bit, then you go in a little further bit. But the point was, as the Rebbe Rashab was saying, is when there's something that's too hot, you go in bit by bit. You go in piece by piece. But it starts with what? He says it starts with the feet. And he says it's the same thing when it comes to what we're going to face. He says it's going to be the feet of Judaism. It's going to be the simplicity of Judaism. Those are going to be the ones who can feel Judaism in a non-sophisticated way. Those are going to be the ones that will be able to withstand the trials and tribulations. In other words, sophistication, the brain does not like to go in the hot water, right? That's why we put our foot in, because our foot is like, it's not that important. I can put my foot in if it gets a little burnt. But the brain says, oh, I got to protect myself. I got to be careful. And so the same thing when it comes to giving up our lives for God, the brain gets in the way. Sometimes if our Judaism is too sophisticated, we're going to fall into the wrong place. There's actually another story. There was I think he was the rabbi in Moscow, and one time a Chabadnik came to him and said, we're in the Soviet Union, and I have to work on Shabbos, otherwise I'm going to lose my livelihood. And he gave him a whole sophisticated explanation how, according to Jewish law, he could get away with working on Shabbos, how it wouldn't be anything biblical, and it would be okay, it wouldn't be a biblical law. You know how we Jews can be smart, so you can look through all the loopholes in Judaism. So he says that, well, I wouldn't be doing anything biblical, and I want to work on Shabbos. Anyways, this rabbi told him, that said, absolutely not. He said, you're Lubavitcher? Are you a Lubavitcher to work on Shabbos? Even, you got all the loopholes. How could you do that? How could you do that? Where's your Mesirat Nefesh? But again, here's where sophistication gets us in trouble. And that's the same thing in our lives, is Mesirat Nefesh, the ability to self-sacrifice, is when we dig deep into ourselves, when we dig deep into our soul to what we really want. The sophistication gets in the way. We give ourselves excuses, we give ourselves reasons, and we explain away different things, how it's really better this way and it's really better that way. And this was getting back to the talk of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. This was really what he was trying to bring out, as he was saying that he was talking to a group of simple Jews. He says, you may be simple Jews, but he said, but it's actually, as he explained it, in some ways it's harder for a sophisticated Jew to commit self-sacrifice than it is for a non-sophisticated Jew. And he says, as well, for a sophisticated Jew, they need to tap into their simplistic Jewish connection, not into their complicated connections and how they figured everything out and how their Judaism is all figured out. As the Rebbe used to quote many times, he says, sometimes when we need to pray like a child. In other words, we have sophistications and ways of explaining our relationship with God and understanding, and pray like a child. Keep it simple sometimes, right? They say in the business world, right? Kiss, right? Keep it simple, stupid, right? Keep it stupid, simple. I don't know exactly. Something in the business world, they say that. Sometimes in our Judaism as well, we need to keep it simple. We need to keep it stupid. And that's really what, not stupid in a bad way, but that's really what the idea here is. And and just to end off the story with the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, so that after he spoke this talk to this group of simple Jews, so they asked him, so practically, how do we make sure we maintain the pure faith? And he told them, make sure every single morning you get up, before you go to shul, you read Psalms while it's still dark outside. And he said, and every evening, make sure you gather in the synagogue and you study Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a collection of the more moral, ethical, and stories teachings of the Talmud. And it was very common for Jews who couldn't study straight up Talmud to study the book of Ein Yaakov. Keep it simple, sweetheart. Okay, that's nicer. Yes. I think actually it really is keep it stupid and simple. I think that was the idea, is that sometimes when we make things too smart, it gets too smart for us. You got to keep things simple. And stupid is not in a bad way. Stupid can be in a good way. Anyways, so the Ein Yaakov, for those that don't know, it's worth looking up, by the way. Ein Yaakov is for those who are not ready to study actual Talmud, though I will give a plug here. The next JLI course is about Talmud, decoding the Talmud. But for those who are not ready to study straight up Talmud, the study of Ein Yaakov was common for many, many years. Jews who were not able to really study Talmud, they would study the Ein Yaakov, which is the collection of the sections of the Talmud that are more ethical and easier for people to digest. So he told them, these simple Jews, make sure you say your Tehillim every morning, make sure you study Ein Yaakov every night, and maintain the simple faith. And indeed, the simple faith that they had was able to keep them going on for many, many years. So all this is to say is that maintaining the feeling, so it's our simplicity, really, that we have to tap into. That's really what it is. Simplicity. That's really what this is about. This is what this chapter of Tanya is about. For those who have been reading these last chapters, and again, this section harkens back to chapter 19. I know I've been getting confused about what the Alter Rebbe is trying to tell us. It's very simple. He's saying, stop being sophisticated. Deep down, you're very simply, in your soul, is a part of you that just wants to connect to God and doesn't want to be disconnected. And that's all there is to it. And if you can connect to the simple you, the real you, you'll be okay. And because that's the essence of who you are. But now I want to get to what he actually discusses here in the chapter. What he actually discusses here in the chapter is how all this ties into the Shema prayer. Everything we discussed in these last chapters tie into the Shema prayer. Again, what has been the theme of these last chapters is you have an inner godly Jewish soul that comes revealed when it comes a test of faith. And if you can tap into that part of yourself, then and remind yourself that that's the real you, the part of you that just wants to be connected to God, and the part of you that does not want to be disconnected from God, then doing mitzvahs will be much easier, because you'll have a natural love towards God and a desire to connect Him, and a natural desire to distance from sins. All this ties into the Shema. And why the Shema? Why the prayer of the Shema? The Shema prayer is, of course, we know, a cornerstone of Jewish faith. And the question is why? Why is the Shema a cornerstone of Jewish faith? The Shema only appears in the Torah once. In fact, let me back up. There are some things in the Torah that appear a couple times. We know that saying the Shema twice a day is a mitzvah. For those who don't know, I'm going to tell you now. You should know there's a mitzvah to say the Shema twice a day. Right? It says in the Shema, when you lie down, when you rise up. Okay? There are many mitzvahs written in the Shema, but saying the Shema itself is actually a mitzvah. You are supposed to say the Shema every single morning. If you look at Chabad.org, there's actually a time frame. You have to say it at waking up hours and at sleeping hours. That means the Shema has to be recited in the morning before the latest time that people wake up. Who are the latest people to wake up? The politicians. Okay, no. Back in the day, it was the kings. The kings would wake up the latest. So the rabbi says, You have to say the morning Shema before the time the kings would wake up, which is 3 hours after sunrise. Okay, 3 Jewish hours. And then they said, and at night you have to say the Shema once the after the stars come out. So what I'm getting to is that Shema is such an important mitzvah in Judaism that we say it twice a day. Yet, this powerful prayer of the Shema does not appear in the Torah until the book of Deuteronomy. Now, can anybody tell me how many commandments do we have in the Torah? Everybody's got to know this one, right?
613.
613, very good. All right, there are 630 commandments in the Torah. Now, when was the book of Deuteronomy said? Anybody knows? What time period?
Right before Moses.
Yeah, before Moses passed away. So it's in the last 40 days of Moses' life. And what's very interesting is that there are many mitzvos, many commandments of the 613 that only appear in Deuteronomy for the first time. So the question that the commentaries ask is, does that mean that for 40 years in the desert, the Jews didn't have 613, and then suddenly it comes the end, and then Moses says, all right, I'm sorry, I forgot. I got to dump another 100 commandments on you.
No.
Right? Is that what's going on in Deuteronomy? So the answer is no. The answer is no. All the mitzvos were given throughout the 40 years, some at different periods of time, but Moses didn't wait till the last minute to give over these commandments. Moses gave over all these commandments earlier. In fact, when you look in the Torah, when it talks about commandments, it says, if you actually read how the Torah writes the commandments, it's very interesting. Sometimes we have the commandments, it's, so to speak, God speaks to Moses, and God says, Moses, I want you to tell the Jewish people this. All right? Sometimes the Torah writes it as Moses told the Jewish people they should do this because God said it. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. Sometimes in the Torah it's written, God told Moses, right, Daber b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people and tell them X, Y, and Z. Okay, speak to the Jewish people and they should do this mitzvah. Okay, sometimes the Torah writes a mitzvah as Moses commanded the Jewish people what God had told him, and then it says exactly what Moshe told the people. And then we have all the mitzvahs being repeated in Deuteronomy. So all the commentaries say that every mitzvah was actually said all 3 of these times. It was during the first 40 years. It was said from God to Moses, and then Moses said it to the people, and then in Deuteronomy, Moses repeated everything. But yet the Torah, of course, which is written by God, in the Torah, God decides exactly how the mitzvos are going to be written in the Torah. Some mitzvos are written only in the format of God speaking to Moses. Some mitzvos are written only in the format of Moses telling the people, but in the first 40 years. And some mitzvos are only written in the format of Moses telling the people in the last 40 days of his life. But really, all the mitzvos had all 3 of those. So with that understanding in mind, that all the mitzvos were actually said like that, why does the Torah pick and choose, do it different ways each time? And of course, the answer is, just like everything else in the Torah, everything in the Torah is written in an exact way. And the way it's written is because there are many, many things that we can learn from exactly the way that it's written, and the place where it's written, and the style that it's written, to the point where that's what the rabbis have been doing for sages, the rabbis and rebbetzims, and everybody's been studying the words of the Torah and its exactitude and its context and the way it's written. Not just what is written, but the way it's written. The Torah is such a perfect book, and the way everything's written is so beautiful. So with that in mind, the Alter Rebbe is going to ask a simple question. The Shema, the pinnacle prayer of Judaism, the most important prayer of Judaism, the prayer that we're supposed to say twice a day, the prayer that when it comes Yom Kippur, we all scream together, Shema Yisrael, the prayer that we say on our deathbed. Why would the Torah wait till Deuteronomy to tell us this mitzvah for the first time? It's not that it wasn't said before. Sure, it was said before. So why did the Torah wait until Deuteronomy to teach us this commandment of the Shema? Not only that, Alter Rebbe is going to add on to his question. He's going to say, if you think about it, the Shema would have been more appropriate to be told earlier. Now, of course, like I said, it was told earlier, but it would have been more appropriate to be written earlier. Why? Because early on in the Jewish people's journey, if we want to go back when they left Egypt even, is when they faced more danger. The Shema is a prayer of a declaration of faith. It's a prayer we say on our deathbed because it's a prayer that we say when we're saying we believe in God no matter what happens to us, right? As we say, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That means we're willing to give up our lives for God. That is why Jews said the Shema as they were giving up their lives. So part of the message of the Shema prayer is Mesirat Nefesh, the willingness and the ability to give up our lives for God. So, to the point, by the way, if you look in the Machzor, in the prayer book for Yom Kippur, when you say the Shema, right before we blow the shofar, right? Everybody says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, right? Everybody says the Shema loud. It says when we say the Shema so loud, we are all supposed to have in mind that we would be willing to give up our lives for God. That's what we say in the Shema prayer. That's what the Machzor prints over there. It says, as you say this line, before you, at the end of the Yom Kippur service, you should be at a place where you're willing to give up your life for God. You should say the Shema with the intention that I would give up my life for God. Every single Jew is supposed to do that. So why would the Jews be doing this at the end of their 40-year travel in the desert? Why would Moses, or I should say, why would the Torah be giving this message all the way at the end of his life when the Jews were about to enter the land of Israel and they were promised that it would be easy wars? They would promise God will go on and fight for you. There wouldn't be a need for Mesirat Nefesh. There wouldn't be a need for self-sacrifice if they listened to God. And in fact, they had many miraculous victories, aside from when people sinned, but they had many miraculous victories. So why was the Shema such an important prayer now? And the Alter Rebbe answers, based on everything we've said till now, it makes sense. Because if the Shema brings out the idea of Mesirat Nefesh, of our willingness and ability to give up our lives for God, then the Shema is the prayer that we need to say as we enter the land and we are about to do all of the mitzvot. I'm going to say that again. If Shema is the prayer that brings out and has the message of my willingness to give up my life for God, then that is the prayer we need to say before we enter the land of Israel, which what happens when we enter the land of Israel? That's when we have to do all the commandments. Remember, many of the commandments cannot be done outside of Israel. I believe there are 200 or something. I don't remember exactly. There are many, many commandments that are dependent only on the land of Israel, right? Certain, all the agricultural laws, many, many commandments only apply in Israel. And so when the Jews were about to be placed upon themselves the yoke of doing all these mitzvahs, that's when they needed to feel Mesirat Nefesh, not because they were going to physically be giving up their lives, but because that would give them the fuel and the fire to do what they needed to do. And that's the same thing that we need. That's why we say Shema twice a day, because we need that. And actually, when you read the Shema actually has the entire message of these chapters. What's the first line of the Shema? What does it mean? And anybody, give me a translation. What's the first line of the Shema?
Hear, O Israel, Lord our God. Our Lord is one.
The Lord is one. Very good. Here is the Lord our God. The Lord is one. Remember how we started this conversation in these chapters, chapter 19 to chapter 25? We started off with talking about the oneness of God. Because as we explained back then, understanding the oneness of God is a key to the willingness to understanding how really every mitzvah is like Mesirat Nefesh. How every mitzvah is either connecting with the one God or disconnecting. Either the mitzvah is when you are connected to the reality of the oneness of God, or a sin is when you are disconnected from the reality of the oneness of God. So the Shema is built beautifully. The Shema, when you think about its structure, the Shema starts off talking about the oneness of God. We have to realize how God is all around us. And then we have to think to ourselves, and if that's the case, I'd never want to be disconnected from God. And that's why we say you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your soul. Right? We got to love God with all our soul. Even if God takes my life, I would love God. And then we continue with all the mitzvos in the Shema, because that's really what the Shema is about. The Shema is this meditation that we read about here in this Tanya, in these last chapters. To truly understand the Shema is to read chapters 19 to chapters 25 in the Tanya. That gives you the real understanding of the Shema. How the oneness of God helps us realize that every mitzvah allows us to be connected to the God, and every sin disconnects us from God. And so that is why the Jewish people, before they entered the land of Israel, that's why in the Torah it's written, that's when they were given the mitzvah of Shema. It's not that they didn't have the mitzvah of Shema earlier, but the message of Shema was important right before they were about to do all of the mitzvahs. And particularly when you think about, in some ways, you actually need the message more when your life is not in danger. In other words, when life is peaceful, that's when we need to remind ourselves about the ability of self-sacrifice. That's when we need to remind ourselves how, because that's what's going to drive us to continuously connect to God, because when things are dangerous, actually, you'll naturally want to connect to God. We need to hear the message of Shema. We need to say that we need to remind ourselves, read the Shema twice a day when life is good. When life is not good, we'll have self-reminders, we don't need so many reminders, but when life is good, that's when we need the reminders. Let's take a look at the Shema chapter here. 1 second, where did this go? Oh, here it is. Okay. 1 second. Let me try that one more time. Share the screen. Okay. Share. Okay. Share. Take a look. So I hope you all understand the Shema a little bit better. You understand how the Torah is written a little bit better. And you understand why the Shema is such a foundational prayer to us. So let's read it here. Based on the above, the Tanya will explain why the mitzvah of reciting the Shema twice daily was only given to the Jewish people 40 years after Sinai, when the children of those who had received the Torah were about to enter the land. And I just want to add one more thing. This is why, and I will get to more after I read this, but this is why, again, Mesirat Nefesh, the concept of giving up our lives for God, was always ingrained in the Chabad philosophy. That's why I would say Chabad is a philosophy and a movement. So this idea that the Rebbe came to his followers and told them to move to far-flung places, which is a concept of Mesirat Nefesh, going out and living ways that you normally wouldn't, going out of your comfort zone. That's really what it is part and parcel of the philosophy of Chabad. Let's continue. Now we'll be able to appreciate why in Deuteronomy, Moses, our teacher, peace unto him, commanded the second generation that was about to enter the land of Israel to recite the Shema twice daily, a mitzvah whose purpose is to accept God's sovereignty upon yourself, the point that you're willing for martyrdom. Look in the Talmud over there. Why was reading the Shema only necessary for the second generation of Israelites who would leave the desert and enter the land? Wasn't the generation that entered the land promised, no man will stand before you? God will cast a trepidation and dread of you upon all the land where you will tread? This second generation had been given a direct divine assurance that they wouldn't be killed by their enemies. Why then was it necessary for them to prepare themselves to be willing martyrdom by reading the Shema? And again, as I mentioned, he doesn't go to here in the Shema, but it's not that the previous generation wasn't given the Shema, but it's why does the Torah stress it here? Rather, this second generation didn't receive the mitzvah of Shema due to an actual threat to their lives, but for another reason, which is what we're discussing. Because in general, Torah and mitzvah observance depends on you constantly reminding yourself of your own willingness for martyrdom for God's oneness. As we've learned in chapters 24 to 25, an important technique to render mitzvah observance very much within reach is to recall the willingness for martyrdom shared by all Jews when faced with forced conversion, and then to frame any transgression in the same light as a complete detachment from God. This helps us understand why the Shema was only given to the second generation of Jews. And again, I don't like his translation here. It's not that it was only given, but it was written in the Torah as being given to them. Unlike their parents' desert generation, whose physical needs were taken care of by God and who lived in social isolation from any culture that might influence them, the second generation would face formidable challenges of worldly and cultural engagement. In order to resist these temptations, they need to recall constantly the dormant love in their souls, i.e. their willingness for martyrdom, and how they did not want to become detached from God, even for a moment. So based on the Tanya's insight, we can appreciate this mitzvah was actually introduced at the perfect moment when Jews were about to encounter some assimilatory forces for the first time and needed tools to combat them. Now think about it, by the way, just to point out. Think about it. What does it say about us in America, right? The shtetl Jew didn't need the Shema to remind themselves about their connection to God. It's us today living in America, feeling free, feeling free. When you're free is actually when you need to read the Shema. As he says, there's a formidable challenge of worldly culture and assimilation. That's what we face. The challenges of freedom require a reminder of of Mesirat Nefesh. I'll tell a story in a moment, but let me just finish the words here. The willingness for martyrdom needs to be inscribed in your heart always. And again, and here are the words of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe says, needs to be inscribed in your heart always, literally day and night. It should not pass from your consciousness, because through this you'll be able to stand against your impulse to evil at all times, at any moment, as mentioned above in this chapter. That's a powerful thing. We need to always remember our willingness for martyrdom. Now, story I wanted to say, two other anecdotes about our Rebbe, the Rebbe. Number one, the Rebbe once is kind of more of a, I don't know if you want to say it's a joke, but it's an interesting thing. The Rebbe once spoke about life insurance. In essence, what is life insurance? Life insurance is when you buy a life insurance, it's basically you're always remembering that you might die at any moment, and so you need a life insurance. And so the Rebbe didn't speak pro or against life insurance. He actually just spoke about the idea as it pertains to our divine service to God. The Rebbe wasn't a financial advisor, okay? So he wouldn't wade into the discussion. But the concept of life insurance was a new concept in the new world. Nobody had it in Russia, you know what I mean? So the Rebbe founded a fascinating concept, and he founded a big lesson, because the concept of life insurance is to always remember that we might die at any moment. And the Rebbe said, and that's similar to what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, if your Yetzer Hara meets you, and you can't shake it off, your evil inclination, you can't shake it off, the Talmud says, remember the day of death. So some people think, oh, what does that mean? I should imagine lying in a grave. And that'll, that's one way of looking at it. Or the other way of looking at it is what we're saying here. Remember your willingness to die for God. Now you should remember to live as a Jew. So just an interesting, funny concept about connecting this with life insurance. If life, this is, shall we say, the Hasidic life insurance. The Hasidic life insurance is to always remember your willingness to give up your life for God, and therefore you should live every single moment connected to God. The other thing I want to mention is another story I was listening today. Was in 1951 or 52, the Rebbe was at a wedding in America. The Rebbe was officiating a wedding for a relative of his, 51 or 52, Dr. Zeligson. And at this wedding, the Rebbe was speaking on and on and on about the Mesirat Nefesh, our willingness to give up our lives for God. And there was a rabbi there at the event. He came to the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, now's not the time. We just got over the Holocaust, and we should, maybe we should talk more positive things. But the Rebbe would, in many of his talks, talk about Mesirat Nefesh, our willingness to give up our lives for God, because that was the bedrock of what gets us to do things. We have to get ourselves to a place where we're willing to be uncomfortable. In other words, that's what Mesirat Nefesh is. Mesirat Nefesh really is our willingness to be uncomfortable. Because what is Mesirat Nefesh? Mesirat Nefesh in its reality, and I keep saying Mesirat Nefesh, Mesirat Nefesh literally means someone who gives over the life for God. So we tend to think, oh wow, Mesirat Nefesh, someone who gives over the life to God. But Mesirat Nefesh, in context as the Rebbe used to talk about it, is just like when someone literally gives over their life for God. That means they're willing to sacrifice a life, which is of course the most important thing to anybody, for a religious ideal, for a connection with God. We all can have Mesirat Nefesh. It means when we're willing to give up comforts, when we're willing to give up comforts in our lives for God as well. Mesirat Nefesh plays a huge role in our lives every single day. It's whether I'm going to spend an extra half hour in bed, or whether I'm going to spend the extra half hour in shul. It's whether I'm going to spend an extra half hour on YouTube, or I'm going to spend an extra half hour in Torah study. It's whether I'm going to spend, whether I'm going to, Shabbat. I'm not going to go to all the fun things that I go to. To be uncomfortable, this is connected to the directive to change our nature. I actually spoke about changing our nature on Shabbat. Very interesting you mentioned that. But changing our nature, just to explain that, changing our nature is what happens when we allow ourselves to be uncomfortable multiple times. In other words, and this goes back to earlier in the Tanya as well. In other words, our willingness to be uncomfortable, you first have to be uncomfortable multiple times, and then it actually changes your nature. In other words, they talk about in habit building as well. But if you in the beginning, it's uncomfortable to go to shul instead of laying in bed. But after 2-3 months or 2-3 years, however long it takes you, your nature will change, and that will become your nature. That will become easy for you, and then your struggle will be in different areas. And as we learned in the Tanya, in the chapter about the Beinoni who serves God and the Beinoni that doesn't serve God, I think it was chapter 14 or 15. It's possible that serving God keeps changing as we grow. In other words, as we grow, what used to be uncomfortable for us now became comfortable, now became nature, and then I need to move on to the next thing and be uncomfortable there. But if you're never willing to become uncomfortable, you will never change your nature, and you'll never, in essence, actually be serving God. That was actually the whole discussion in chapter 14 and 15, I think it was, where you have to have a willingness to go beyond. He spoke about somebody who was, let's say, a naturally studious person, and someone who naturally is not very physical, doesn't care too much about physical pleasure. So you could have someone who literally doesn't sin, who just enjoys studying and prayer, but they're not serving God because they're not willing to become uncomfortable. And the Tanya says that's not what we want. We want that people should have a willingness to become uncomfortable. You have to be willing to go beyond what you want. That's really what it is. What is what you want? What you want is what the evil inclination wants, what the Yetzer Hara wants, what the Nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul wants. We need to be able to be willing to become uncomfortable, and that's what Mesirat Nefesh is. In a broad sense, Mesirat Nefesh, giving up our lives, means a willingness to give up of myself, and that's what being uncomfortable is. Being uncomfortable means I'm willing to give up of myself. So all of you, I'm sure, that come here to the Tanya class, there are many other things you can do now. How many other people in the world are during their lunch break? They I don't know what they do. They do what they do. And so in the first couple times you had to make a real effort to show up. And that's what's demanded in all the areas of our lives. So the concept of Mesirat Nefesh, again, was something the Rebbe used to harp on and quote many, many times about being uncomfortable. Okay, I got a question here, and I also want to show a video since I'm talking about Mesirat Nefesh, because before I get to this question, unfortunately, in Chabad, fortunately in Chabad, we generally don't have to practice real Mesirat Nefesh. Fortunately, usually it's just being uncomfortable. But we had very recently where a Chabad rabbi literally did Mesirat Nefesh. He gave up his life very literally. And so I actually want to end this class today, not right now, but when we end the class, I'm going to end it with a 8-minute video from Jem, a tribute to him and all the Rebbe talking about the Mesirat Nefesh and how that led to the Shluchim movement. And just as an aside, people were wondering, is Chabad going to be leaving the UAE after the story? And I actually was surprised. I didn't even know that. I think they said there's like 7 rabbis there already. It's like, I thought there was like just 2. I mean, there's already 7 Chabad rabbis there. And so they're out there, they're willing, I guess I got not too bad to be in Palm Harbor, Florida. It could be in the UAE. But it's a Mesirat Nefesh wherever you go. And as you watch the video, when the Rebbe talks about Mesirat Nefesh, that's what it is, the willingness to be uncomfortable. And we all have to find that in our lives. We have to find places in our lives where we are willing to be uncomfortable and we are willing to go beyond. And that always changes throughout our lives. It keeps changing. We need to constantly find a place. And I would just caution, don't do too much at once. Like I said a moment ago, become uncomfortable in one area till that becomes nature to you, and then do the next area. It's very hard to fight a multi-pronged war, as unfortunately Israel was doing for a while. And so in your own lives, we want to be practical. We need to find an area of our life and identify an area of your life where you could be doing better, where you could be connecting to God more, where you could be tapping in more into your Mesirat Nefesh, your willingness and your inner soul willingness to connect to God. Find an area where you need to become uncomfortable and delve into that and really lean into it until that, whatever it is that you're doing, becomes second nature. And then from there, move on and find the next thing. Someone wrote here, can you talk at some point where these points are referenced in the Torah? You would have to be more specific on that question. But I'm going to show the video here now. And then again, I really don't want to start the next topic because the next topic is is really a whole nother thing. Now, 1 second. Let me go here. The next topic is an entirely different discussion of what we've been discussing till now. So I'm going to show this video, then I'm going to wrap up with just a summary of the last 25 chapters, and then we'll come back next week if we have class next week. I think we should. And then we'll come back next week into a discussion of the next section of Tanya, which is, well, I'll discuss it at the end of this class. So let's take a look here at this video.
Der Bala Hilul hat sich gekocht und hat sich Messer Nefesh gewählt. Auf Peil sein bei jeder und bei jeder sei bei Anoshim, sei bei Noshim. A jeder von sie soll werden ein Maschpier. Gehen und Peil sein auf der zweiten Niedna, der zweite Ried soll werden Nente zu dem Ebersten. Leite Rosse oder mit zwei Soll, das Hajinje, was das Mann Gromo.
פתיחת שליחת. פתיחת מזאת בשליחת. פתיחת בשליחת.
Wodos ist doch verbunden mit vorne in Amok im Roche Begashmius. Und gefunden dort Jiden, wo sie seine Roche Beruchni ist. Und Nufton mit sie. Mit darf wählen, bei der zweiten, soll werden Herrn Wortel. Und auch der Seder, wo das Mitzvah, die öfter, was ist alle die Acheri. Gefühlt sich irgendwo ein Engel, ein Mädel, wo sie wissen nicht, was Jüdischkeit ist. Oder als sie wissen sie mehr nicht dem Allerbeis von Jüdischkeit, als Scholes von Jüdischkeit. Sie wissen nicht von dem Jäger, Wachstivus, von Shabbos und Kashrus und Chul.
Shema.
On behalf of our students, I thank you and Lubavitcher, Rabbi Sloman, for everything you do for us. Thank you very much.
שהרב וולוסוב, שהרב של רמת ישי, פעיל מאוד, נותן את מלוא הנשמה והלב להצלחת המערכת. והוא מקיים את הפסוק של הבעל שם טוב, ויפוצו מעיינותיך החוצה.
Rabbone, die uns alle ist nicht musikalische Judentum, ohne Rabbone.
Kann es dingen sich mit sich, als hat sehr viel Arbeit beim Keme Hu. Und darf bewahren in sich und darf bewahren in die Bnei Bayis. Wo hat das Zeit und Keach und Meretz und Chulu? Auf Trachten wegen Aiden in Bekatz mit Tevel.
Wenn man Hongkong weggeht, doch gedacht, der Basis geregelt ist, was wir.
Sie gewähnt Poshet an Islam, überall in Israel, wir werden mit Rabbi gewohnt dort, in Bosel Babelsche dort gibt, haben es mit gesehen dort, sie nicht zu glauben.
Aid darf uftan in Welt. Sich Messer Nefesh sein, soll onkommen, dwar Hawaii zu Aloche. Soll onkommen, ner Mitzvah, vetera bis in a Pina Recheka. Bishar der Etzem von Asami Niden, if ner nicht, wie Messias Nefesh, und demult beim Kinchilik nicht, wie bald das ist sein Metzies, is in was für ein Neffen, was für ein Tkufa, was für ein Mai mit Domatis, es soll nicht sein, es soll mehr nicht, wie Messias Nefesh. Da sie der gewähnt Glarba Kabbalas Anisius, in Tofre Spee, wo demult der gewähnt Acheshach, Koffel und Chupal, Porschet mit Zad Gedrelis am Malchus und Heilig Behesiv. hat man geschickt Schluchim und bis mit sie mitgefahren Beruchnis. In Schluchi Shalodom Kemese, in Apina Nidacha שבמדינה ההיא. Gott sie gewähnt verbunden mit Zakones Nefoshes Bepeyel. Und was noch aggressor im Messias Nefesh, wie schaß mit Kleibt des a zweiten Nieden. Und mich schickt in a Schlichis, wo die Schlichis sie verbunden mit Zakones Nefoshes, ist das a Schelei Be'erech. Aggressor im Messias Nefesh, wie mich stellt sich ein in Zakones.
We have learned that the United Arab Emirates has now arrested 3 individuals in the death of Rabbi Zvi Kogan. He was murdered by terrorists after being abducted on Thursday.
Amen. Amen. One.
Na viele Nordru, wie sie gewähren als Sehne, was man hat sie gehabt. Hat nach morgen weiter sich Meister Nefesh gewähren und sie klieben, a zweiten Nieden auf ihm, schicken, soll ne Male Mokim sein von dem Schliach, was mit dem gehabt. Was geommer, dass Schelei Be'erech, a hechere, a tiefere, a schwerere, Messias Nefesh, wie das, was mich stellt, ein sich allein.
זעזוע בכאב שאין לתאר. אנו עומדים היום מול מיטתו של השליח היקר והחשוב, הרב צבי קוגן השם אינקוים דומוי.
רזאו זום הנפש אפס מישראל, דאס זאנלו מולי, ודצוי דומם מצויי ניצה על בלתי ניצב אחד, דופשטלן כמה מייסדיס, was demot ist doch nicht nur ein Jini, was Haus ist im Chesed. Aber hat mir mal gewähnt, den Mott in Hachosse, nur wie mit Guir in Kabole und in Sides, und alle Jiden sein nach Kimo, Achas, Schlemo. Und haben schon mal nichts gesehen. Nur denn sie geht darüber in eine meine Dumatte. Und demot ist ihr Ilu. Hängt doch von Meister Hatachsteini.
We are determined to establish and to build a base Zvi, a house of splendor in the UAE, a center where people will come together, reflecting their warmth.
Durch meisten Themen Shenasim Lischusa. Lachas kame וכמה המשתל zu einem Male Mokim, jedoch spielt zu von Aliyah, מדרגו לדרגו, מחייל לחויל, ist in dem Schome, was מעיד את סיבה שתהיה, ist נכתב לפני יום. Und das, was mir da decken bei den Nebischen und an Netrossen fehlten dazu, also soll sein nicht in der Leitung von Netrot, sie an Nachstobi, sondern soll sein mit der Simcha, Vesule, Wort, und Bechefet und Berachmin, wie sie in der Leitung von Oparaxto, Yomo, Vakidmo, Vitafeno, Vonegbo, wie sie alle Haperes, Lefonenu, Vashem, Berecha.
We're not just here to survive. We're here to transform the world.
Okay. Second, let me just make sure that doesn't continue. Okay. Let me go back here. So obviously again I showed that because this like I said, unfortunately we had a scenario of Mesirat Nefesh, and looking at these stories, and Rabbi Kogan hopefully can inspire us. can inspire us as well to live a life of Mesirat Nefesh. And the Rebbe actually threw out a line there that was actually very common. It's very common in Hasidic terminology. What's called a Mesiras Nefesh Yid, a Jew who's willing to self-sacrifice. And there are people who live their whole lives, never gave up their life for God, and they're willing to live a life of Mesirat Nefesh. Doesn't mean they would go in places where they would be in physical danger. It meant, this is what it means, Mesirat Nefesh. Mesirat Nefesh means willing to make yourselves uncomfortable. And so we all should learn from Rabbi Kogan to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. You knew what he was getting into going to the UAE. It is an Arabic country, as friendly as it is. Of course, Chabad is not necessarily going into Aleppo, Syria right now, but we do go to places that are less than hospitable, and we do it with the understanding of what it says here in Tanya, is that it's not about my comfort in life, it's about what my mission in life is, and what we are needed here for on this earth. And so as you go throughout your day, again, you can take Rabbi Kogan's memory and remind yourself that you too can be uncomfortable and find the different areas of your life where you're willing to be uncomfortable. And that would be a blessing and an honor to his memory. I'm just going to end off here today's class with just a quick summary of all the chapters that we had till now, chapters 1 through chapter 25. So and again, I'm not going to go through every chapter specifically, but chapter 1, so we started off with the idea that God does not ask of us more than we need. This is on the first page. It says, because the thing is very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. And so we started off talking about the fight of the evil inclination and the good inclination, or the godly soul and the animal soul. And we spoke about the concept of what is a tzaddik, what is a rasha, what is a beinoni, and that gave us to understand that we want to aim to be a beinoni. A beinoni is someone who does not control their impulses, but controls how they act. And we discussed the concept that we can have moach shalat al lev, our mind can rule the heart, and that is something that everybody can do. And in mind ruling the heart, we gave 2 paths. One path is to really study about God, learn about God, contemplate about God, have feelings towards God, think about how much God does for us, and think about how much God does for the world, and how great he is, and how small we are, and all the different things we can think about God. And that would give us and give birth to feelings towards God, but that requires great understanding and great study. Then the second model does not require great understanding and great study. It requires being just knowing and understanding who we are. Having the godly and Jewish soul allows us to tap into our love of God, and therefore we will, when we get to our inner and godly soul, the part of us that's willing to sacrifice itself for God, surely being a little bit uncomfortable is something that we can all do. And just to give you what's a look up ahead, chapter 26 through chapter 34, we will talk about joy in serving God, the importance of joy and how to attain it. Chapter 35 to 37, we'll talk about deed, how deed is the most important thing, mitzvahs, because actually if you read the Tanya carefully till now, it almost sounds like Torah is the most important thing. And then chapter 38 to chapter 50, we'll talk about feelings and intention in our mitzvahs. So after we establish that doing the mitzvah, the deed is the most important thing, how important are our intentions, our kavanahs, they call it. So that's what we have looking forward to us. And I look forward to doing the next journey with you. And may we all celebrate this upcoming Rosh Hashanah of Hasidic philosophy on this coming Sunday, Monday, and this coming Friday and Shabbos. And I hope you have a very meaningful Yud Tet Kislev.